For reasons that are too complicated and too deep to discuss here now, the left-right division in Europe and America runs along the fault line of nationalism versus globalism. And again, for a variety of reasons, the left has become increasingly uncomfortable and disdainful of, of nationalism over the past 50 years, let's say, a bit more probably. Whereas the right still upholds the nation state as the only truly legitimate model of governance in the world. Up until the 1960s or so, 60s, 70s, both left and right saw nationalism in a good light, as moral and just, and as a force for good in society and in the world. Since then, the right retained that position, remained where it was, whereas the left has evolved and has come to see nationalism negatively as a vehicle of fascism and racism and xenophobia, imperialism, sexism, a long line of social ills. And this has become clearer with time as the left shifted from more centrist leaders like Bill Clinton and Tony Blair to more left-wing, to more, not fringe, but more leftward-leaning leaders like Barack Obama, Justin Trudeau, and Jeremy Corbyn. Due to this shift, national symbols that are cherished on the right, okay, like the national flag, the anthem, statues of national heroes, even the national language itself, are increasingly cast in left-wing quarters of the society as problematic at the very least. Because they're triumphalist, because they're excluding, because they're associated with, again, all those social ills that I listed before. Again, racism, xenophobia, blah, blah. And the same is true of concepts that, again, used to be part of the consensus, like national borders, or national self-determination, or national citizenship. Now, the state of Israel has unwittingly found itself in the midst of this grand debate in the West in the late stages of the second half of the 20th century, or the third, since the late 20th century. And that's the position that it's this uncomfortable position that it still finds itself in today. Because, look, while there's no doubt that some of Israel's image problems in the West are products of anti-Semitism, and some are products of Israel's own policy, own conflict with the Palestinians, much of the European and American left's growing discomfort with Israel has to do with Israel's open adherence to what used to be conventional 20th century nationalism. Whereas the American and European left have grown increasingly uncomfortable with nationalism, Israel has remained unapologetically nationalist. Okay? Israelis see Israel as the land of the Jews and do not consider this to be an unenlightened sentiment. Okay? This nationalist sentiment, which was wholly conventional on both the left and right in America and in Europe in the 1950s and 60s, has become some sort of conservative declaration even a defiantly conservative declaration for many on the European and American left. So, to their surprise, Israelis have found themselves embraced by political conservatives in Europe and the Americas. The Jewish state is correctly perceived on the European and American right as an emblem of old-fashioned nationalism, even though when you look at Israel in terms of its public policy, you can see that Israel actually checks all the boxes that traditionally identifies countries as left-leaning. It's a kind of a welfare social democracy. Israel has a highly regulated and centralized economy. It's a very strong welfare state, has strict environmental protections, a thoroughgoing green energy and resource preservation program. It's committed to gay rights, women's rights. It has very generous maternity benefits, a free press, etc. Public transportation. So now there's no doubt that Israel has moved to the right since its founding as a socialist country. But that's not why conservatives in America or in Europe are attracted to Israel. Okay? Because as Israel moved to the right since its founding, it's done exactly what most European countries have done too. Okay? Just like Western Europe, Israel abandoned explicitly socialist policies based on class conflict and class consciousness. But just like Western Europe, Israel remains committed to welfare statism and to the various projects of the European liberal left. Okay, so by all kind of objective parameters of where Israel is on the left-right in terms of public policy, Israel is very much like most Western European countries. And yet, American and European conservatives are attracted to it. Okay? So it's in a way that they're not attracted to Belgium or Sweden or France or Germany. Okay? So what conservatives find attractive in Israel, therefore, is not its conventionally liberal public policies, but its open, straightforward commitment to Jewish nationhood. Okay? So leaders of the Republican Party and the Christian community, the Christian right, as they were once called, have been some of the staunchest supporters and admirers of Israel for decades. Conservative parties in Canada, in Europe, in South America have likewise become vocal in their support for Israel, expressing appreciation for Israel's commitment to its national identity, national self-interest, national self-defense, and national self-determination, and denying the accusation that Israel is a colonial occupier of the land of Israel. Okay? This support manifests itself in these conservative parties' growing willingness and even desire to declaratively move their country's embassies in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, which is Israel's controversial national capital. By contrast, the political left in these countries looks past all of Israel's left-wing public policies on a host of those hot-button issues, again, from global warming and gay rights to welfare state and wealth distribution, redistribution. Okay, so the political left in the West looks past all of these left-wing public policies in Israel and castigates Israel for its nationalist struggle against the Palestinian people. Okay. So, for example, prominent Democrats in the United States, like left-wing leaders in Canada and in Europe, refer to Israel repeatedly as an apartheid state and compare Israeli policies in Judea and Samaria to Nazi Germany's occupation of Europe, or even to the Holocaust itself. Left-wing organizations likewise see Israel at the very least as problematic for its policies towards Palestinians, and therefore promote a global BDS campaign, boycott, divest, and sanction campaign against Israel, which pressures institutions and governments in the West to treat the Jewish state, and only the Jewish state, as a pariah state. Okay. On a practical level, BDS campaigns call on American corporations and institutions to boycott Israeli organizations, companies, Israeli products, Israeli scholars and artists, to divest from the Israeli economy and Israeli industries, and to sanction the state of Israel. Okay. Now, there's no doubt that Israel's ongoing conflict with the Palestinians troubles the European and American left. But keep in mind that this conflict is over 130 years old. And up until recently, up until about 40 or so years ago, the left's sympathies and support were with the Jews, not the Palestinians. Only in the 1980s and 90s did the left shift its sympathies and come to see Israel's stance towards the Palestinians as disqualifying, as beyond the pale, as deplorable. The left's deepening disapproval of Israel goes deeper than taking sides in a low-grade local conflict in the Middle East between two peoples. Its fixation, the European and American left's fixation on Israel's local conflict as the singular and defining feature of the Jewish state, to the exclusion of all others, of all those domestic policies that Israel maintains, reflects instead a long-standing ambivalence regarding nationalism and regarding Jewish nationalism in particular. Because from the start, Zionism stood out as a problematic national Zionism stood out as a problematic national movement in the sense that there was no widespread agreement that Jews constitute a real nation, as do the Poles or the Finns or the Estonians or the Turks. The emancipation of European Jews, first in Western Europe, but eventually as far east as Russia, the emancipation of European Jews redefined Jews as one of Europe's religious minorities, rather than a national minority group. Okay, so this was an innovation of the of the late 18th or mid 19th century. Okay, the Jews were recast as simply a religious minority rather than a national or ethnic minority. And to this day, this question of whether Jews are a nation remains salient to those who argue for or against Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. There's no clearer example of this than the modern-day attempt in the Arab and Muslim world to delegitimize Israel by denying the very notion that Jews are a nation. And this is articulated starkly in the Palestinian Charter, which states that claims of historical religious ties of Jews with Palestine are incompatible with the facts of history. Again, this is from Article 20 of the Palestinian Charter. Judaism, being a religion, is not an independent nationality, nor do Jews constitute a single nation with an identity of its own. They are citizens of the states to which they belong. End quote. Judaism is Judaism as nationalism, or Judaism as a religion, is therefore not some sort of theoretical or conceptual debate among scholars or rabbis. The claim of Jewish nationhood has stark and real and violent consequences in the real lives of Arabs and Jews in Israel, as well as Arabs and Jews in Europe and in America. Ever since the collapse of Europe's global empires, nationhood has been what gives legitimacy to dominion over territory. The Muslim insistence that Judaism is merely a religion rather than a nationality, therefore casts Israel as an illegitimate state. It's a criminal and colonialist enterprise that occupies land to which Jews have no right. By contrast, those Jews and Gentiles who accept the 3,000-year-old understanding that Jews are a nation, accept Israel's right to exist as a Jewish nation state in its ancient native land, speaking its ancient native tongue, and practicing its ancient native religion. Now, as the political left has become more critical and apprehensive about nationalism generally, it has also come to revisit the question of Jewish nationalism. When the new European and globalist project to dilute national identity in Europe and diminish national self-determination in Europe and elsewhere on the globe, when this project combined with this effort to diminish national identity and diminish national self-determination in Europe and in the world with globalist institutions like the EU and World Trade Organization, etc., when this new project combined with old European anti-Semitism, it produced a fixation on Israel as the paragon of the evils of ethnic nationalism. And this explains why Israel, rather than more obvious problem states like China or Syria or Egypt or Singapore or Iran, why Israel is singled out for for criticism and censure in international forums like the United Nations and the European Union. It explains why the UN General Assembly and the UN Human Rights Council have condemned Israel more times than all nations of the world combined. It is what drives university students in Europe and in America to protest, denounce, and demand boycotts against Israel, while remaining silent about truly murderous and oppressive regimes like Syria, China, and Iran, or North Korea. Now, the fixation on Israel is definitely anti-Semitism, because anti-Semitism is, by definition, an obsession with Jews. Okay, so people who have an obsessive fixation on the Jewish state are, by definition, anti-Semitic. But this obsession with the Jewish state is not baseless. Okay? Those on the left who are offended and frightened by nationalism are correct to identify Jewish nationalism as the oldest and most well-documented form of nationalism that we have in the West. Jewish nationalism is the basic building block of the whole concept of nationalism in Western civilization. Jews have conducted themselves as a nation since biblical times. They formed and held the Jewish state in the land of Israel for roughly 1,000 years, from King David to the Roman exile. And then throughout their subsequent 2,000-year exile from Israel, they retained their national identity, transmitting from one generation to the next the national language, national religion, and a sense of national solidarity and mutual assistance. So Jewish nationalism was definitely an integral part of the cresting wave of European nationalism in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. But whereas this nationalist impulse was new in European societies, it was old in Jewish society. Whereas the insistence on organizing states on the principle of a shared ethnic origin and national self-determination was a novelty in Christian Europe and in the Ottoman Empire, it was not a novelty in Judaism. Okay? Jewish nationalism is as old as Judaism. So the idea of Estonia as the land of the Estonians, or Germany as the land of the Germans, or Turkey as the land of the Turks, this idea was novel and countercultural as a concept in the 19th century. But the idea of Israel as the land of the Jews was ancient and well documented in the Hebrew Bible, which is the most widely read book in world history. So the point is that while it's correct to identify anti-Semitism when you see this fixation on the Jewish state, you can see that it's not baseless. Okay? People who have a problem with nationalism definitely will have a problem with Israel because, like I said, because Jewish nationalism is the most basic building block of the concept of nationalism in Western society, because it is the most historically well-documented instance or documentation or illustration of this notion of a nation and national self-determination and national cohesion and national identity.